Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupini avatar varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. So we are continuing our discussion on Buddhism, especially Nagarjuna's Shunyavada. I think I mentioned earlier on a previous occasion that Nagarjuna's philosophy was elaborately discussed in some of the later commentaries. And there were two schools of thought, one which emerged within the Madhyamika tradition. One is known as Prasangikas, the school of Prasangikas. Prasanga means what perhaps we call it reductio ad absurdum, it is called reductio or reductio, depending upon how you pronounce it. So reductio ad absurdum is a very unique method that Nagarjuna employed, like Socrates did during the pre-Christian times, So you don't openly refute the opponent's view, rather you accept for the argument's sake the opponent's view, and then you reveal the contradictions within that system, so automatically you conclude that it is wrong. So instead of stating your position, you don't declare your position. Rather, for the argument's sake, you accept the opponent's position, and then you reveal the mutual contradictions, the paradoxes within that system, which automatically lead to its own dissolution, its own rejection. So, because the problem with the Madhyamika system was, they believed, the doctrine was Shunyavada. So, if you make a position, if you use pramanas, pramana means, epistemological tools. If you use pramanas to prove that everything is shunya, then you are involving yourself in an argument which involves a kind of paradox. If everything is shunya, then why do you have to prove it by making your position? So all that you have to do is to reveal the fact that opposite view is mutually contradictory. It is self-contradictory. So once these self-contradictions are revealed, then it automatically becomes very obvious that Shunya is the ultimate reality. So this method, called reductio ad absurdum, was used by Nagarjuna. But that was more focused, and Nagarjuna's system was interpreted by a great writer called Chandrakirti in his well-known commentary, which I refer to, Prasannapada. Now, of course, if you want to find out the origin of this method, you find in Buddha himself. Some of the discourses of Buddha follow this method, and some of the earlier exponents of this method was Aditya and Buddha Palita. In contrast to this, there was another school of Madhyamikas, and they were Bhava Viveka, called Bhavya. He also wrote a commentary on Madhyamika Karika, Bhava Viveka. So they came to be known as Swatantrikas because they wanted to prove, and they used pramanas to establish the doctrine of Shunya. So this should be kept in mind. We will quote from not only Madhyamika Karika but also from a well-known book Nagarjuna wrote. It is known as there's a very well-known book that Nagarjuna Lord Vigraha Vyavartini. Vigraha Vyavartini means, literally it means the one that helps you to get rid of all disputes and doubts and contradictions. Dispute, I mean, an approach or a book or a doctrine that helps you to get rid of all doubts and disputes and contradictions and false notions. That's the literal meaning of Vigraha Vyavartini, which is another book that Nagarjuna wrote, which is also very important in the Madhyamika tradition. And the Shunyavada Buddhists consider these two books as equally important. Of course, the more authentic work is obviously Madhyamika Karika. So when we talk about this ad absurdum, you have to also keep in mind another doctrine which also has its parallels in Greek philosophy. That is called ad infinitum, or maybe it means if you use arguments, pramanas, epistemological tools, then every argument leads to another argument, and it leads to a third and fourth and fifth. So there will be no resolution, there will be no conclusion. It becomes eternally inconclusive. So Nagarjuna believed that if you use pramanas or epistemological tools to prove shunya, it will not take you anywhere. Therefore, the best method is to try to reveal the contradictions or the self-contradictions of the opponent's view. That was what he actually did. And incidentally, you find, as I'm going to mention later, you can find some of these ideas in pre-Christian Greek philosophy also. Both these reductio ad absurdum and reductio regression, I mean this ad infinitum, both were used by the earlier Greek philosophers. So at this time we have to keep in mind one of the central doctrines of Madhyamika philosophy, that is, it comes in the beginning of the dedicatory verses of the Madhyamika Karika, that is Anirodham, Anutpadam, Anuchedam, Ashashwadam, Anegartham, Ananartham, Anagamam, Anirgamam, Ya Pratitya Samutpadam, Prapajopashamam Shivam, Deshayamasa Sambuddha, Tam Vande Padadamvaram. This is how Nagarjuna begins his Madhyamika Karika, a kind of invocation. But he says, Padadamvaram, Tam Vande, I salute the great Buddha, who is the supreme among speakers, among teachers. And then he, of course, he pays tribute to the great philosophy. That means that Buddha preached the non-ceasing, non-arising, non-annihilation, non-permanence, non-identity, and the non-difference, non-appearance and non-disappearance. And that is called Praditya Samutpada. So that means everything comes depending upon something and then ceases to exist, again reappears, again disappears. So in reality, there is no ultimate eternal truth in this empirical world, Praditya Samutpada, dependent origination. So that means at the very beginning of the text, as an invocation, the supreme teaching of Shunyavada is proclaimed at the very beginning. So that should be kept in mind when we are going to discuss this. So why ad infinitum? If you use pramanas, you are involving yourself in a discussion to prove something, and then somebody can tell you, you want to prove. What do you want to prove? Nothing exists. If nothing is existing, then why do you want to prove it? So it's far better, much more logical to prove that the opponent's view, the opponents are those who tell you that there is something that exists, That doctrine is wrong. You don't have to prove yourself, you have to disprove the other party. So that is the foundation of that, the prasanga method. I mean, the reductio ad absurdum is this particular verse that comes at the very beginning. It's a kind of dedication. I mean, tam vande padadam, that Buddha, the great teacher, the great speaker, the exponent of this Shunya doctrine, I pay my tribute to him. This is how he begins. Now, coming to this subject again, let's go back to the pre-Nagarjuna times. I mean, let's go back to Buddha himself. In the Pali canon, the Samyukta Nikaya, there is a sutta. It is called Kachayana Gota Sutta. It's called, in Sanskrit you may call it Katyayana Gotra Sutra. So this sutra contains maybe what could be called a very genesis of Buddha's teaching according to Shunyavadins. The right view. So this Katyayana asks Buddha. It's called Kachayana in Pali because the pronunciation is different. Pali and Prakrit, may be called some kind of a unrefined, colloquial, popular conversational language, maybe used by people who have not studied pronunciation and grammar. So frequently you find in many of the later Sanskrit texts, there are references to people. The word mlecha is used. So mlecha is somebody who speaks Sanskrit in a very uncouth, in a very improper manner. Wrong pronunciation, wrong syntax and grammar, usage and patterns. So such a person is called, mlecha is not a derogatory term. It just is a term used by people who are supposed to be learned. Those were the days of monarchies and aristocracies and learned pandits who were proud of their learning. They may dedicate their entire life to study language, literature, philosophy, and so on. So, the Siksha was the science of pronunciation, Vyakarana was the science of grammar. So those who are not well versed in these, they spoke Sanskrit in a very crude manner. So they used to be called people who speak Sanskrit in an improper manner. So a rustic language. So you find in Ramayana, there is one scene, the Valmiki Ramayana, when Hanuman comes to meet Rama, who was with Lakshmana at that time, looking. So at that time, Hanuman was the ambassador, maybe the envoy of the monkey kingdom, Sugriva. So after the long conversation with Lakshmana, Hanuman is returning. So looking at this Hanuman, Rama tells Lakshmana, na anugveda vinitasya, na ayurveda dharinaga, na asama veda vidusho shakyamevam prabhashidam, krishnam vyagaranam nunam anena bagudha sudam, bahu vyakarada anena na kinchit apashabdidam. So Rama's tribute to Hanuman's proficiency in all the 14 schools of Sanskrit grammar and also in phonetics, Siksha Shastra. It's very elaborate science of pronunciation, syntax, you find Siksha Shastra. It's very important to study before learning the Veda. So the point is, in this context, Katyayana becomes Kachayana. So Gotra becomes Gotha. Maybe just an additional information, that's all, nothing more, not related to this. So Katyayana asks this question, puts the question to Buddha about the nature of the right view, what's the right approach. Buddha responded by referring to the tendency of certain people to fall into two binary views, two extreme views. One is The one view is everything exists, everything is existing, everything exists. You may call it some kind of extreme kind of realistic view. In contrast to this, some other people will tell you nothing exists. Both are equally contradictory. One is nihilism, the other is eternalism. Now Buddha says both are wrong. The binary views are both wrong. That's the origin of the Chatuskodi, the rejection of Chatuskodi by Nagarjuna that we discussed very elaborately at the beginning of the session. Discussion on Shunyavada. So Buddha taught what you call middle way, very madhyama, in between, middle. So this sutra actually tells you the one thing that generally people are attached to duality. The truth is non-dual. So that's an important point, remember. The truth is non-dual. If the truth is beyond the binary prepositions, then it is neither this nor that. So, nor the combination of both, nor the absence of both. So, Chatuskodi, 4 prepositions are rejected. Then what is that? It is non-dual. So, in a way, and Buddha says that people take these dogmatic binary positions in their outlook to life because of their ignorance, because they do not know the truth of praditya samutpada, dependent origination. They don't realize that everything is conditioned, everything is coming and going, again re-emerging. So, in fact, there is nothing that actually exists. At the same time, remember, it is not that doctrine that nothing exists. So, if you accept the original teaching of Buddha, Dve Satye Samubhasitya Buddhanam Dharma Chetana Loka Samvriddhi Satyam Cha Paramarthataka. So this is a very important doctrine that Buddha actually teaches. And surprisingly, you find in one of the commentaries of the great commentator his name is Chandrakirti. Chandrakirti gives a beautiful commentary on this particular verse. The verse is Dve Satye Samupasitya Buddhanam Dharmadeshana Loka Samvriddhi Satyam Cha Paramarthataka. It comes in the 24th chapter of Mula Madhyama Karika, and maybe it is the 8th verse. So Chandrakirti makes it very, very clear. Anyone who reads this, and Chandrakirti's Prasannapada commentary is supposed to be the most authentic. So he makes it very, very clear in his commentary. Ihahi Bhagavadam Buddhanam Satyadvemasitya Dharmadeshana Pravartate. So Chandrakirti writes in his commentary, in this, according to this verse, Bhagavatam Buddhana, depending upon or according to Buddha's fundamental teachings, Satyadvayam. There are 2 truths, 2 realities. What are they? One is Loka Samvriddhi Satyam, that is Paramartha Satyam. Now, Kadamat Satyadvayam, what are those 2 truths? Loka Samvriddhi Satyam Cha, Paramartha Satyam Cha. Chandrakirti writes in his commentary. There are 2 truths, 2 realities, 2 important doctrines with regard to the absolute reality. What is that? One, the empirical, the everyday common sense experience, the world, our physical body, Panchaskandhas, and actually Praditya Samutpada is also included in that. Whatever we experience in our life cycles, and we wrongly assume it is eternal, which is only not really eternal, but it's only empirical. That what Advaitins call Vyavaharika Satta, the empirical reality. That is one. Loka Samvriddhi Satyam cha, the Paramartha Satyam cha. Tatra Skandhatma Loke Akyadas Tatra Loko hi Nischitaha. Idi Vachana Panja Skandhan Upadaya Prajnapyamanaha Pudgalo Loke Ityuchade. Samandadvaranam Samandaharanam Samvriddhi Ajnanam hi Samanda Sarvapadartha Tattva Avachadana Samvriddhi Idi Uchyate. So, when the absolute truth is not realized, when you are not aware of it, then what happens? We may think this Samvriddhi Satya, the relative empirical truth, is the only thing. And not only that, he comes very close to Advaita. Athava Samvriddhi Sanketu Loka Vyavaharaka Ityarthaka. So he practically comes to Vyavaharika Satta. That's an important thing. Advaita also will tell you, the moment you realize the truth, that everything in this world is changing, only relative, not absolute reality, coming and going, all the, including our body, mind, intellect, everything, the empirical experience, they are just Vyavaharika Satta, common sense realities, common sense experiences. That comes and goes. So that's why he uses the word Loka Vyavaharaka. But that Chandrakirti almost uses the language of Advaitins, really speaking. Now the point is, such a thing cannot be called as that absolute reality. It is an experienced truth, an experience-based reality. When you want to define something, then you may come to the level of binary prepositions. When you approach experience, then you go beyond binary. Then you cannot really explain. You really use words to explain it. That is Chatuskodi Vediriktam, means beyond or transcending the four prepositions of existing, non-existing, combination of both and absence of both. All the four prepositions are rejected. So as I mentioned, you can find Chandrakirti does much more justice to Nagarjuna's original position, because Nagarjuna himself uses this prasanga method, that reductio absurdum and ad infinitum. Both these find in Nagarjuna's system. First of all, if you go on arguing using language, trying to prove something, everything can be disproved. So there is no end to logic. Everything leads to another question. Every preposition or every assertion will be questioned, can have a different view. And that leads to an infinite number of a chain reactions of questions, answers, and there will be no resolution, there will be no conclusion. They could add infinitum. And because of this, the only reasonable method is prasanga, that is reductio ad absurdum. Reducing things to absurdity means when you, for the argument's sake, you accept something, then you explore, go deeper into what you at the beginning maybe you pretend to accept or agree with, and then you reveal the contradictions and absurdities, then naturally it becomes obviously absurd and it is automatically rejected without your stating your own position. Of course, mostly Nagarjuna levels, of course, doesn't openly say, but Chandrakirti refers to, the views of some Yogacara schools who believe that some kind of a Vijnana, Ale Vijnanavati, there is a subject that is existing. So, Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas who believed in the truth of objective world. Of course, Kshanabhangavada, everything is momentary, they accepted, but those things do exist at the momentary level, and Nagarjuna doesn't agree with that. So that's why he criticizes pramanas, because pramanas will lead to ad infinitum. Sometimes we pronounce ad infinitum, depending upon how your preference, that's a thing. Of course, maybe the Latin pronunciation ad infinitum or something. Anyway, that's a different matter. So this is an important contribution of Nagarjuna. Just maybe for those who want to know further, you can say Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, they all applied this, this ad absurdum, reductio ad absurdum, this prasanga method in their own arguments and writings. At the same time, the later philosopher Zeno, he used ad absurdum. So anyway, so this is a very important thing to remember. Now, what exactly does he do? That's an important thing to do. So Nagarjuna employs this method to show that any attempt to assert any kind of inherent existence, Swabhava, is the word Swabhava, in the phenomenal world, it leads to logical contradictions. And he exposes these contradictions, and then he eventually leads his opponent to the conclusion that everything is Shunya. This is an important point. Now, coming to the next subject, let us go a little deeper into this. How does Nagarjuna employ this prasanga method or Chandrakirti English commentary to establish the non-dual nature of Shunya? Shunya is also non-dual, it's an Advaya. When Nagarjuna insists the word Advaya used in Vigraham Vyavartini also. It's a smaller book. So, he says that reality is non-dual. That means either existence, non-existence, or the combination of both, or the absence of both. So when we realize this, then what happens is, we are able to overcome all dualistic thinking. As a spiritual discipline, when we meditate on Shunya, when we meditate upon the Pratitya Samutpada, when we meditate upon the fact that everything is coming and going, then our mind is freed. We are liberated from the clutches of Trishna, desire, clinging, samskaras, and that eventually helps us to get out of this samsara, and that leads to nirvana. This is his method. Praditya Samutpada is a sadhana. So once we meditate upon the momentariness or the conditioned nature, the dependent origination of all empirical phenomena, then we are detached from any kind of attachment. So when we are liberated from attachment, what happens is there is no more trishna left, no more samskaras, and no more tendencies and impressions, and that will lead to cessation of samsara, means cessation of the cycle of birth, life, death and rebirth. So again, Nagarjuna uses this method against all non-Shunyavada, all non-Madhyamika traditions, especially Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas. Those of you who may get a sample of how Advaitins used the same method which Nagarjuna used in 3rd century, Gaudapada in the 6th century, when he wrote this Mandukya Kariga, Mandukya Upanishad Kariga. So Kariga, same Kariga, I mean commentary in verses. He uses the same method. So what he does is, he brings out the inherent contradictions between Sautrantikas and Vaibhashikas, two schools of realists who belong to Hinayana tradition, Theravada tradition. And then he also brings out the inherent contradictions between the doctrines of both Vijnanavadins, Yogacharya schools, and also Madhyamika, means Shunyavada schools. And then what he does is, all these contradictions prove that Advaita is only reality. That's what he does in Gaudapada Kariga or Mandukya Upanishad Kariga. So the method used by Nagarjuna was again employed, I would say, with far greater efficiency by Gaudapada, especially when you think of the very big, very elaborate, very celebrated commentary, Shankaracharya's commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad. It's called Mandukya Upanishad Kariga, and in Gaudapada Kariga was elaborately expounded in its Bhashya by Shankaracharya. And then what happens is, so when we realize Shunya as a fact, all dualistic thinking gets dissolved. One can experience this world in a non-dual way. That is, everything is empty. You can live in this world, but at the same time you will also realize, when you look at the phenomenal nature, all these worldly experiences, when you connect with them, you also will realize that they are all empty of any inherent existence. So when this happens, we are liberated from the clutches of duality. Anyway, these are some of the methods. Secondly, the reductio ad absurdum, it also helps us to be free from attachment, aversion, likes and dislikes, raga, dvesha, etc. Because the eightfold disciplines of Buddhists involves freedom, spiritual disciplines designed to make us free from all mental conditions, raga, dvesha, etc. So this is an important point that I want to mention, and then just a few more things about Chandrakirti. Chandrakirti's commentary, Prasannapada commentary is very important. I would like to discuss a few things about Chandrakirti's commentary and also Nagarjuna's own another magnum opus. It's called Vigriha Vyavartini. And then for next session onwards, we will discuss more verses from Madhyamika and also from Vigriha Vyavartini. I don't know if there is a translation at all available, maybe not. I don't think Vigriha Vyavartini is ever translated to English, maybe not. So we can try to understand, ask questions later. Slightly more complicated just because it is somewhat less known than Mula Madhyamaka Karika. So one thing. Now, one thing, Chandrakirti's Prasannapada, the word itself means clear words, is influential. So, because Nagarjuna's work itself is somewhat dense and sometimes enigmatic, so Chandrakirti brings out this idea. So there are scholars who will tell you that Nagarjuna's Madhyamika Karika would have remained somewhat unknown, or it would have caused a lot of misunderstanding about Shunyavada without Chandrakirti's commentary. Chandrakirti is the only great commentator who openly brings out the truth of this, the Advaitic aspect of Shunyavada. As I mentioned here, if you read this Vigriha Vyavartini, which I am quoting from, the commentary, अथवा समृद्धि संकेतो लोक विहारित्यर्थः स च अभिधान अभिधेय ज्ञानज्ञेयादि लक्षणः लोके समृद्धि loka samvriddhi. So, whatever happens in this world, whatever we experience in the relative plane in the world, that is samvriddhi satyam, empirical truth. Kim punaha aloka samvriddhi ityapi yata evam visishyade loka samvriddhi. So is there something else which is not loka samvriddhi, which is not empirical? So if you are, this is the style of commentary. So Nagarjuna goes on, of course, Chandrakirti goes on explaining Nagarjuna's verses. That is the 8th verse, supposed to be most important because it takes us very close to Advaita. Dve satye samuvasitya buddhanam dharmasdeshana loka samvriddhi satyam cha paramarthata. So Chandrakirti discusses loke samvriddhi loka sankriti kim punaha loka samvriddhi rityapi asti ched yata evam visishyade loka samvriddhi. So he says, is there something like punaha aloka samvriddhi? There is such a thing as non-empirical, the absolute. Then yathavastita padathanuvada esha natraisha chindavadaradi athava timira kala timirgalami buddheya avasthana tesham ya samvriddhi risavaloka samvriddhi ado visishyade loka samvriddhi edacha madhyamavatare vistarena uktam tato vedidavyam loka samvriddhya satyam loka samvriddhirastyam sarva eva aya abhidana abhidhe jneye jnanadi avishesho loka samvriddhi iti uchyade nahi paramarthata ede vyavakharaka sambhavati tatrahi Nivrtam abhidadavyam nivutte chindagojare anutpanna aniruddhahi nirvanamida satyate. Avarapratyam. Now, what Chandrakirti is trying to explain is, this is a very, maybe we can't take every word, but I shall try to explain in brief. What he says, in this world, whatever we experience in terms of knower, I am knowing, that is I am the knower, something that I know, that is jnata, jneya, something that is known, and the process of knowing, that is jnanam. So whatever happens in this world in terms of transactional knowledge, using our mind and the 5 senses, panchaskandhas, all these involved, all those together constitute loka samvriddhi. I mean vyavakharika satta. Skandhatma loke akyadas tatra loko hinishchidaha. So all the panchaskandhas, all the samskaras, vedana, everything belongs to the empirical level. And in another context, Madhyamikarika tells you that when you go beyond loka samvriddhi, then you realize paramartha satta. Loka satyam, when you go beyond samvriddhi satyam or vyavakharika satta, empirical reality, relative reality, when you go beyond, you realize the supreme truth. And the supreme truth is beyond words. It is something to be experienced. That supreme truth is the awareness that comes to us that everything in this world is devoid of inherent permanent existence. This comes as an experience, and this experience is nirvana. Its practical benefit is that we feel liberated from the cycle of birth, life and death. It doesn't mean that we are never born. What happens is we realize ourselves to be a truth, to be something that is not subjected to pratitya samupada. That is not born, therefore never existing, and that doesn't disappear. It is beyond the pratitya samupada, beyond loka samvriddhi, beyond samvriddhi satya. It is the ultimate truth, and the ultimate truth is shunya. So practically you come very close to the Brahmajnanam, Atmanubhuti of Advaitics. So there are many verses in the Vigraha Vyavartini also which are very similar to Advaitic ideas. So anyway, that is an important thing. Second important contribution of Nagarjuna is he criticizes what you call essentialism. So we can't say Nagarjuna is an existentialist, but he is opposed to essentialism because he argues that using independent syllogisms implies belief in inherent existence. Again, that's an important thing. Any use of epistemology, direct perception or inference or anything, any source book, as a source of knowledge will imply the inherent existence of something. And that inherent existence is not really that exists, it is part of the empirical vyavaharika experience that is within the framework of the praditya sampada, that comes, that disappears, that re-emerges. Just like one example given is like waves in an ocean. We cannot say the waves do not exist, but it is also correct to say that waves do not exist. It can be said or it cannot be said. Both are correct because waves are not an integral part of ocean. There can be a time when the ocean is devoid of any waves. So ocean can exist without waves, but waves cannot exist without ocean. So waves are like Loka Sambhuti Satya. That again actually restatement of Dirdishi Viveka. Srishti Nama Brahmarube Satchidananda Vastuni Abdho Fenadiva Sarvanama Rupa Prasarana. We can find many verses in the devotional philosophical classic of Bhagavata Purana from Yoga Vasishtha, and there are many identical verses in Vigraha Vyavartini and also Mula Madhyama Karika. And of course Gaudapada Karika also you find. So Srishti Nama Brahmari, what is this Srishti? What is this Loka Samvrti as Nagarjuna calls it? Or Loka Vyavaharaka as he calls it. Empirical Vyavaharika Satta as Advaitins will call it. What is it? It is Srishtina Brahmarupe Satchidananda Vastuni Abdhau Fenadivat. So there are drops of water, waves, currents, small little pools, all you find in an ocean. It's wrong to say they do not exist, but it's wrong to say that they always exist, because ocean can exist, as I mentioned earlier, without waves and without phenomena, without forms and all those things, they can exist. So, Loka Samvrti is what we experience when we have not realized the truth of Shunya, when we are still at the level of Praditya Samutpada. That's what Nagarjuna says. Now, a few words about Vigraha Vyavartini. It's also the second foundational text of Nagarjuna. And the important role of this text is that it addresses and it responds to certain objections raised against Nagarjuna's doctrine of Shunyavada. Which in the Shunyavada, of course, Shunya idea was opposed by some Yogacara philosophers who came later. Yogacara belonged to Vijnanavadins. Dignaga, Dharmapala, who was the abbot of Nalanda University when Huyang Sang visited, many of them were Yogacara Buddhists. So they did not agree with Nagarjuna. Of course, Nagarjuna wrote this book much earlier, but you have to understand, you have to read them together to understand these mutual arguments. So Nagarjuna responds to certain arguments which have been raised against Shunya doctrine by the early Buddhists who wrote books in the first century, second century AD, before Nagarjuna. But Lankavadara Sutras and all. Some of these sutras are, we don't know who are the authors. Some of the sutras are we don't know, are not very clear to the authorship of many of these works. But there were certainly these ideas of Shunya, though it became a compact doctrine under Nagarjuna. And again, Nagarjuna says that the truth cannot be discussed in terms of pramanas, but still he discusses some of the pramanas that could be employed. Second point is, Nagarjuna says in Vigriha Vyavartini, if we make any effort to explain or discuss, to prove by pramanas, as Bhavya, Bhava Viveka, the opposing school of Madhyamika, who was the exponent of Swatantrika, Sondra school, who was also a commentator on Madhyamika Karika, Chandrakirti. So they believed that the Shunyavada position can be proved and expounded. So Nagarjuna says in his Vigriha Vyavartini that any kind of involvement to state a position, to prove something, also will be self-contradictory. Because if your goal is to prove that nothing exists, then there is no need of any kind of effort. So again, he was opposed to the idea of making any positive assertions, and he countered some of the opposite views that came from previous Buddhists, and also he was opposed to the idea of using pramanas or epistemological tools in establishing anything. Shunya can be proved to be a fact only by disproving, by contradicting the views of the opponents, by apparently accepting the opponent's view and then bringing out the contradictions in the opponent's assertion. So that will automatically lead to rejection of the opposing view and the establishment of Shunya, which cannot be established, it can only be experienced. So it automatically comes. In fact, the Rajasattva Bhranti all can be used here when you bring a light, when you are no more under the wrong notion that it is a snake, then the fact it is a rope is self-revealed. That's again you can find in Advaita. Advaita also the same thing. You are looking at this world, if you are not fully enlightened, we are not fully experienced or Advaitic truth of the reality, then we see only this world. We don't experience Brahman. But when we experience Brahman, then we see this world, but not as this world of names and forms, but something different. This world, that means Brahman manifesting in names and in terms of names and forms, Nama Rupa. So somebody who has brought light, taking the Rajasattva Bhranti, the snake rope analogy again, you brought light and you are now convinced that it is not a snake but a rope. So now you are not bothered because the snake idea totally disappears. You don't have to make a statement that it is not a snake because it becomes obvious. So what is obvious need not be stated. That idea comes in Shankara philosophy also. What is obvious need not be stated, need not be established because it is so obvious. And so, for example, something that is obviously wrong, you need not make a statement, and you cannot make a statement. Something is obviously right, you cannot oppose it, but there is no need to make a statement. So, prasaktasya ko nishedhaha, prasaktasya ka prastavaka. Aprasaktasya ko nishedhaha, aprasaktasya kaprastavaka. What is obviously wrong, there is no need to make a statement that it is wrong, because it's a fact of experience. And what is obviously right, you don't have to prove it, because, but if there is somebody who tells you that pots and pans made of clay are totally distinct from the clay, then you have to disprove, well, no, it's not a fact. All the pots and pans are made of clay are non-distinct and non-different from clay. It becomes obvious. But at the same time, when there is no scope for any kind of misunderstanding, then you don't make a statement. So I have tried to bring out some aspects of Shunyavada philosophy. The dialectical aspects are slightly complicated. Those who are not familiar with these terms can find it slightly disturbing. But you can ask questions. I shall try to explain further. Okay. We will be discussing again more verses with Sandragita's commentary from Mula Madhyamikari and also Vigraha Vyavartani, Nagarjuna's own important work. Okay, thank you.
The dialectical richness of this is very palpable. The idea of the dialectical approach of reductio ad absurdum is really interesting, because instead of taking on the fallacy and just saying, no, that's fallacious, the approach is cleverly indirect in that it argues, okay, have it your way, and then reveals that the consequences of adopting that position are ridiculous. I mean, it's almost satirical in approach, but it's serious in that it's a one might say a non-violent approach.
And again, Shunya can only be proved that way. Because even if you try to involve in an argument, I want to prove nothing exists, then you are part of the Shunya.
Yes.
You are part of the nothing, and you are trying to prove nothing. Actually, there is no need of any kind of arguments. If you are trying to prove Shunya with the help of direct perception, inference, or verbal testimony, or presumption, or any of these tools of epistemology, then you are contradicting yourself, because the goal is to prove that nothing exists.
So the pramanas are of no use in that scenario.
Now, you remember, there you can see the genius of Advaita. I am not speaking with some special preference for Advaita. In Advaita, one important principle is, and that's made very clear by Shankaracharya. He says every argument, every statement, even the highest statement, like Mahavakyas, they are all within the level of Dvaita. I mean, within the level of avidya, within the level of ignorance. Even teacher, the subject being taught, and the student. Shastram, Shishya, Shastra. Teacher, the subject being taught, and a student. These three are also within duality. Because once we realize, these boundaries, distinctions disappear. So the highest statement of Advaitic truth that you can possibly make in language is Aham Brahmasmi. That itself is within avidya, within ignorance. When you reach the experience dimension of Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, then you don't have to make a statement, I am Brahman. See, when you don't make, I have a head on my, I have a head, I have 5 fingers on my hand, I have 2 hands, you don't make a statement. So obvious, really speaking. It's so obvious. So what is so obvious doesn't require a statement or an affirmation or a declaration. What is obviously non-existent, that you don't have to make, it doesn't exist. That idea, that is an Advaita. Here also Nagarjuna says, in the Chandrakirti in his commentary, Loka Sambuddhi is nothing but Loka Vyavakharaka, whatever you see in this world. Shankaracharya says in one of the commentaries in the I think Mandukya Karika, he says, Prag Brahmatma Vijnana Sarva Loka Vyavakharanam Satyatva Vaputtihi Yatha Swapna Dushtasya Iva Prag Prabodhat. It's a very powerful statement. He says, before you realize the Advaitic truth, till you realize the Advaitic truth, this world is real for you. Absolutely real. Nagarjuna also agrees that's right. That's why he says, Chandrakirti's commentary says, why do you make this Loka Samvrti? Why do you talk about these empirical realities? Is there something, Loka Samvrti, is there something that is non-empirical? That non-empirical cannot be stated. But we can talk a lot about Loka Samvrti, the empirical. The non-empirical is beyond words, beyond statement, beyond verbalization. So that's the coming verses will tell you. That is the same Advaita I find. So, Sri Ramakrishna in his simple language says, drinking milk is one thing, drinking milk and getting nourished is one thing. Talking about milk, writing a volume, a book about milk is something different. So you can find surprisingly, most probably because, when Shunyavada traveled beyond the boundaries of Vedantic tradition, naturally it got new interpretations, because in the environment of Vedanta, we can very easily relate Loka Sambuddhi with Loka Vyavakharaka. The word Loka Vyavakharaka used by Shankaracharya also, same like that. Paramartha Satta is used by Shankaracharya. So we say, Loka Sambuddhi Satyam cha Paramartha Dakha. That's also says there. So, I think most of the misunderstandings about Shunyavada originated from attempts to localize Buddha's teachings. That's the natural conclusion. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj. David, before we get to David, very quickly, just on the historical timeline.
Yeah.
The commentator Chandrakirti, he comes about 400 years later.
Yeah.
And the reason is what you referred to last week.
Yeah.
Right? It was the invasion and the destruction of Nalanda.
Nalanda, exactly. Yeah.
And so that accounts for the gap in the history.
Yeah. And also there is reason to believe that a number of books were destroyed. The entire library was burned by Muhammad Bhakti Khilji, who attacked and destroyed Nalanda University. Fortunately, Huyen Tsang and a few Chinese pilgrims who had come to as students in Nalanda had taken a number of Sanskrit manuscripts, and they were translated into Chinese, which were later retranslated into Sanskrit equivalents. There were some scraps and fragments of many manuscripts available, but they were retrieved and reconstructed. So that what you said is absolutely correct. Nagarjuna 2nd, 3rd century AD, and Chandrakirti maybe 6th century, almost a contemporary. I think he was a contemporary, or I think he must have come after Gaudapada. But anyway, there were a number of other great Yogacara philosophers who were prominent around that time. So, okay.
It makes the history even more exceptional because of these gaps. I mean, it's not like they got to just easily comment on a generational predecessor.
Yeah.
There are these links in history that are just remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
I have a question. Can Shunya be I guess the way I think of it is avidya is not the absence of avidya is an active embracing illusion, an absence of knowledge. It's like it's not just I don't see the rope; it's I see a snake instead of a rope. Is said that this is equivalent to Maya, which is equivalent to Shunya.
Really, Shunya is not Maya. Shunya is the silent internal recognition of the absence of any inherent existence for any of these empirical phenomena. So Maya is the power of concealment and false projection. What do you call avarana and vikshepa. So that, something is hidden, something conceals something, and because you are not able to see what it is, you take it for something else. So there is the absence of correct understanding, there is a projection of a false notion. So, avarana and vikshepa. So these two aspects combined together can be called the phenomenon known as Maya. Maya is something that really doesn't exist, but you realize that it doesn't exist only when you come out of it. In fact, you can see, for example, you realize the truth of dependent origination only when you come out of it. Otherwise, you are within it. Because our desire for enjoyments and samskaras and tendencies which create clinging to life, which again leads to the continuation of this cyclic rotation, the 12-link chain called pratitya samutpada. So, when we first realize the Four Noble Truths, and then we realize this pratitya samutpada, I think realizing pratitya samutpada is somewhat equivalent to realizing the absence of any inherent truth in the empirical phenomena, and that is shunya. So somehow you can put them together, but not exactly the same. Remember, avidya and maya can be put together, but pratitya samutpada and maya can also be somewhat put together. But shunya and maya cannot be put together. Shunya is that experience which can only be called the experience of the absence of any inherent existence for any of the empirical phenomena. I tell you, from an experience point of view, these empirical experiences are not empirical for a person who cannot even think of anything beyond the empirical. This is a fact. The idea of bondage never occurs to a person who cannot think of anything beyond this life in this bondage, within the bondage. So, once you realize the shunya, then you are out of the pratitya samutpada. You are out of maya. So when we read Nagarjuna and when we read Vigraha Vyavartani, Madhyamikariga and Vigraha Vyavartani, you find and Vigraha Vyavartani is some kind of a conclusion where he states his positions. It's a much smaller work, slightly less important than Mula Madhyamikariga as a foundation text, but it's more focused. So, and especially Nagarjuna was true to this idea of prasanga. Prasanga means the reductio ad absurdum. He was, because he felt convinced that shunya can be proved only by this method. And Chandragurti agrees with that. So, I think your question is very profound in a way. Plenty of food for thought. And many people write articles, When many publications, they want original thoughts. So frequently, they want some original articles. So maybe wonderful scope for, sophistry and polemics. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Operationally speaking, Buddhism is very popular because of some of the. It appears to offer a rich set of meditations. From what I gather from what you told us, meditation involves cultivating Vairagya and Viveka. Nityananda was Viveka and Vairagya by cultivating Sakshi Bhava to withdraw from it.
Yeah.
Is there more to the Buddhist meditation than this, or oversimplifying?
Yeah, no, Buddhist meditation is not very different from the meditation techniques expounded by Patanjali. Patanjali, of course, is only sutras, by Vyasa and other commentators. But I shall address the first question, why Buddhism is popular. That is true. One reason is the revolt against the idea of a creator God that began with the publication of Origin of Species, and also at the social level with the emergence of radical humanism in the mid-19th century. So you can find the emergence of Darwin and Karl Marx and Engels, the radical humanism, and also revolt against creationism, against Genesis. So I think that vacuum can be properly filled only by Buddhism, because Advaita Vedanta is a good alternate ideal, but it is too transcendental. And for the common people, Buddha is a good person, so he teaches some fundamental ethical, moral disciplines. You don't have to worry about God or anything. So you follow these things. And again, Buddhist meditation practices. It's also, as you mentioned, it also has helped to make Buddhism popular. But very often you find in Buddhist tradition, Buddhist societies, the faith is somewhat thinly spread. Many of the Buddhist societies, traditional Buddhist communities in Asian countries were converted into Christianity. They became easy prey by missionaries who, not by enlightened people, they were great missionaries also, but by these evangelicals who, through propaganda, all those things you can find. So they did not read Augustine or Aquinas or anything. They just said something very, and that was a very fertile field, many of these countries. So Buddhism, of course, this is an advantage, but that is true in Mahayana countries, but not in Hinayana. In Sri Lanka, Burma, and all these countries, Buddhism went deeper. So in many of the Mahayana societies, communities, somewhat not very deep in some places at least. So, and again, Buddhism is essentially it is an ideology of humanism, pure humanism. So the charm of pure humanism, compassion, non-violence, all these great values which are associated with Buddhism made it very popular. That's true. Those who are not willing to believe in a God, they are welcome to accept Buddhism. Pure humanism it can be. So that's true.
Is there a parallel in Buddhism to Ramana Maharishi's Atma Vichara method?
Ramana Maharshi, yeah. See, Ramana Maharshi's Atma Vichara is taken from the seventh verse, seventh mantra of Mandukya Upanishad. Nanda Prakyam, Bhish Prakyam, Veda Prakyam, etc. That's not related to Ramana Maharshi. But later on, you follow this method. Advaitam Chaturtham Manditsa Atma Savijñeyaha. So you follow this path this Atman is to be known. So Shankaracharya's commentary contains many of the statements in Sanskrit. Many of the fundamental, for example, who am I? That comes from Shankara's commentary on the seventh mantra. Who am I? Find out. Who am I beyond this body, mind complex, who am I? That is straight from Shankaracharya's Bhashya. On the seventh mantra you find. So I don't think Ramana Maharshi is... Of course, Ramana Maharshi was a great spiritual teacher. Buddha was a great spiritual teacher. Naturally there will be many common things, but you can't say it's taken from that, Direct connection you don't see. Both were great spiritual teachers. Buddha was a great spiritual teacher. Okay. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Actually, it was just
please.
removed.
Removed? Okay.
It was just removed. The question had to do with whether the imagination was more or less important than knowledge. I think, if I'm paraphrasing the question correctly.
Imagination.
Imagination as opposed to knowledge itself. So that was the way the question was phrased. I was going to ask it next time.
Yeah, maybe the questioner must have meant direct perception or something. Imagination and knowledge, imagination plays a very important role, no doubt, in spiritual life. Because when we read something, when we get a great spiritual idea, when we internalize that idea through imagination, it has an actual benefit, no doubt. But the internalization can take place only after proper perception, I think. So, okay. So thank you for the question anyway. Next. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.